let's add some elements to this frame. So take a look at the top left option. Here the first one is basically the move tool that we are using, which is our mouse cursor. And the second one is the scale tool. Now the scale tool is basically for resizing the elements in your page. So to select the scale tool, you can select from here or you can hit the K button on your keyboard. Now before selecting the scale tool, I'll just zoom out a little bit because that's how I feel comfortable editing. Okay, so now let's say I'll select this frame one right here and I want to resize this frame. So for that I need the scale tool. So let's hit the K button on our keyboard. So now the scale tool has been activated. Now if I take my mouse towards one of these edges, you can see the cursor has changed. Now this is a resizing tool. So if I just left click and drag this thing, I can resize my frame 1. Okay, so this is how the resizing tool works. Now similarly, if I want to resize this frame, so I'll just select on it and I'll take my cursor towards the edge and I'll just drag this thing. Okay, now if you take a look, while I'm resizing this frame, some part of it is going behind this frame 1. Now if you want this frame right here behind this our first frame, so all you have to do is just go to the layers section and then hold your left mouse button on our first frame and drag this thing above the frame 1. Okay, so this is how layers work. Now I'll just put it back where it was and I'll just move this thing right here. Okay, so now if I select this frame and I go towards the edge, you can see currently the scale option is still on. So if you want to turn this off, just hit the V button on your keyboard. Okay, so now if I take my cursor towards the edge, you can see we can still resize this thing, but it won't be resized according to a fixed dimension. You are going to resize this thing randomly. Okay, so I'll just hit Ctrl Z on my keyboard to take it back to its original dimension. And now let's hit the K button again. And now you can see that we are resizing this thing in a fixed dimension, resizing proportionally. Okay, so I'll just hit the V button on my keyboard again to go back to the move option. So you can select it from here as well. You can either move or select scale. Now let's move on to the second option. So the second option is frame. We have already covered that part. And now the third option is the shape tools. So here if I expand this, you can see these are the various shape tools. And some of these tools have a shortcut as well. So as you get well versed with Figma, you can just directly select using shortcuts. You don't need to select from this menu every time. So let's go with the rectangle first. Now I'll just click on this rectangle. So now just like the freestyle frame, you can just hold your left mouse button and drag this thing to create a rectangle. And when you leave the mouse button, the rectangle has been formed. Okay, so I'll just click outside. And now there's another feature of this rectangle tool as well. Let's select the rectangle tool again. And now let's say I want to add a square instead of a rectangle. Okay, so if you want to add a square instead of a rectangle, you can add that using this same option. That's the rectangle tool. So for that, all you have to do is just hold the shift button on your keyboard and then drag this thing. Okay, so now if you take a look, while we are dragging this thing, it's going in a perfect square manner. I'll just leave my mouse button and then leave the shift key. Okay, so it stays perfect. Okay, so here's our square and here's our rectangle, and both of them have been added using the same rectangle tool. Just like the frame option, when we selected frame, we were able to make changes in the design section. So similarly, if you want to make changes to your rectangle or square or any elements that you add, you just have to select these elements and then you can make changes right here. Okay, so let's change the fill of this square. I'll change it to blue, and let's change the fill of this rectangle as well. I'll keep it as white and I'll just add a stroke to this. I'll just change the stroke color and change the stroke width. Let's explore some more shape tools. So there's the line. So I'll just select this line thing, and similarly you can just hold your left mouse button and you can drag this thing. Now if you want this to be exactly at 0 degrees or 45 degrees or 90 degrees, you can just hold the shift button on your keyboard, and from there you can just drag this thing. So you can see it stays in proportion, and then I'll leave my mouse button so that we have a straight line. So here's the line. You can select this line and you can make changes in the design section. So let's change the stroke width of this line. So there it is. And let's change the stroke color to red. Okay, now moving on, there's this arrow option as well. So it's similar to line. Now I'll just hold my shift key and drag this thing right here. So we have an arrow here as well. and I'll just change the stroke width and change the stroke color. And there are some options here as well. You can change the endpoint as well. Okay, so there's the diamond arrow, there's the line arrow. So this is useful for making flowcharts and so on. Moving on, there's this ellipse. Now you can just hold your left mouse button and drag this thing. So I'll just leave this thing as it is. Now you can add a perfect circle as well using this ellipse tool. So all you have to do is just select the ellipse tool, and before you start dragging this thing by holding your left mouse button, just hold the shift key on your keyboard so that we get a perfect circle. So this is how it works, and leave the mouse button first and then leave the shift key so that it stays perfect. Now I'll select my first frame once again. So if I try to resize this thing, you can see we are resizing in free dimension. Now if I hold the shift key while I'm resizing this thing, you can see it moves in a perfect proportion. We can do the freestyle that we want. Okay, so this is how the shift key works. I just add some fill to our circle as well. Now moving on, let's talk about the other tools. So I'll just expand this thing. Here you can see there's a pen tool and there's a pencil tool. So let's select the pen tool first. Now the pen tool is similar to connecting the dots. So if you want to create a vector, you can use the pen tool. So the first step is just click somewhere, and now this will be the starting point. And now if you click again, so this will be the other point. So it's similar to creating dots and lines. Okay, so we are creating a vector right here. And now I'll just take this to the start point, or you can take this to any point you want. And once you are done, just click on done right here. Okay, now let's select our vector, and you can see there are various edit features that we can use for vector as well. So let's add a fill to this vector. Currently the fill hasn't been added, so let's hit the plus sign, and now you can see the vector has a fill as well. So let's change the fill of this vector to red. Okay, so now this is just for your reference. The vectors are very useful. You can create any free shape that you want. Now moving on, there's the pencil tool. So I'll just select this pencil tool. Now it's for freestyling. Okay, so you can just hold your left mouse button and draw anything that you want. And if you want to draw a straight line, you can just hold the shift button on your keyboard so that it draws a straight line. Okay, so this is how the pencil tool works. And once you are done with the pencil tool, just hit the V button on your keyboard so that you go back to the move option. And if you want to delete any particular element, all you have to do is just select that particular element. Okay, now let's say I want to delete this thing that I have drawn with the pencil. So just select this element and hit the backspace button on your keyboard. Okay, so now this thing is gone. And if you want to undo the changes, now let's say I have deleted this pencil drawing and I want to bring it back. So just hit Ctrl Z on your keyboard so that it undo the changes. Okay, it takes a step back. You can do that a lot of times to go back to the previous step. Okay, so I'll just select this again and delete it by hitting the backspace. Okay, so I'll delete this thing as well and this one as well. Okay, so that's all about the pencil and pen tool. Now let's move on with the other one. That's the text tool. So I'll just select on text right here, and now let's add text somewhere in our frame. So I'll just go down using the hand tool and I'll zoom in. Now let's add text in this box. Okay, so I'll just click right here, and now from here you can just add any text you want. So let's say, and once you are done, just click outside somewhere. Okay, so here's our text, and I'll just drag this thing towards the center. You can see Figma is a very smart tool. It gives you dimensions as well. Now as I point this right here, you can see it says it's perfectly in the center. And now you can customize this text as well. You can see in the right side in the design option there are various options. Here are the font styles. Okay, so you can change the font from here. Okay, so let's change the font style as well. I'll change it to bold. Now moving on, there's the hand tool that we have already covered. You can just hold the space button on your keyboard and drag this thing anywhere you want. And the last feature is adding a comment. So I'll just select this thing, and you can select where you want to add a comment. Okay, so I'll just select this circle right here and I'll add a comment. So I'll just hit post. So now the comment has been added, and now I'll hit the V button on my keyboard to go back. Now let's say you're working as a team and you want to check the comments that your teammates have left on this particular design. So you just have to click this comment right here, and on the right side you can see the various comments that your teammates have dropped. and here you can see there's the one comment. So here it is. So this is how comments are useful when you are working as a team. Okay, so that's all for this session. We have covered with the basics of Figma. In the later session, we will move on with the more advanced features of Figma and we will cover the prototyping part as well. Okay, so that's all. Thank you.